Buenos días.
Good day. I want
Quiero
to
mandar un
send a
saludo
very
muy
warm
afectuoso
greeting
y combativo
and
a los
to
compañeros
our
de SOA Watch,
friends
que hoy
at
cumplen
SOA
30
Watch
años de
who now have
trabajo
just
perseverante e
celebrating the 30
ininterrumpido
years of
y
very
muy
important work,
eficaz
a
para
very uninterrupted work, and work that has been
visualizar las
very
acciones que
efficient to help to
hace
visualize, to
Estados
show up what
Unidos en
U.S.
nuestros
actions
territorios en
are
América Latina
happening in our
a
territories in
través
Latin
de las
America. Um,
capacitaciones que ha
and this
ofrecido la
happens
Escuela de
through
las Américas
to
durante
show
ya
up
largo
what
tiempo,
the
después de
training
la
at the
Segunda Guerra Mundial,
School
de
of
ahí
the
en
Americas
adelante que se
um,
estableció una
ever
política
since the Second World
anticomunista,
War. There was
antisubversional,
a policy of
antiinsurgente en todo el continente,
anti-communist,
pero el continente
anti-insurgent,
que, de acuerdo con
anti-insurrectional, and this was
la
something
política del
that they
gobierno
were able
estadounidense, pues
to
le
join
pertenecía, era
with the
parte, era,
U.S. policy,
siguen creyendo
and
que
they
es
still believe that
parte
it's
de su acervo, de su
part of their
plataforma para a
backyard, of
partir
their
de ahí competir
platform
con el resto del
to be
mundo
able
y
to
sentar las
compete with the
reglas
rest of
del
the
acontecer
world
mundial.
and to set
Entonces,
the
para
rules
nosotros,
of what
el
is
trabajo de
happening
SOA
worldwide.
Watch ha
So for
sido
us,
muy
SOA Watch's work
importante,
has been very
incluso
important.
muchas de las veces en
Many of
nuestros
the
trabajos
times of these,
recurrimos a sus
we use
archivos,
their
a sus listas de entrenados
archives,
por la
their
Escuela
list
de
of
las
people who have been
Américas, que
trained by the
realmente ha
School of
sido
the Americas.
una
This has
aportación
really
muy
been a
valiosa.
very valuable
Yo
contribution.
no me puedo quedar con
I
ustedes por eso
can't
les
stay
empleo,
with you, that's why I'm
pero
creating this
sí
video, but I
quiero
do want to
comentar y
comment,
compartir con
to share
ustedes
with you
algunos puntos.
several
Uno de
points.
ellos es que a
One
veces
of them is
no
that sometimes
visualizamos
we can't
que
see
dentro de la
what is
militarización que se
happening
ha ido
within the
imponiendo
militarization that has been
en el conjunto
applied
mundial,
on the
el
world
país que
stage,
podríamos
that
decir
the
más
country that you might
militarizado
say
está
has the most
increíblemente es
militarized
Estados
is the
Unidos.
United
De
States.
las bases
Of
militares
the
que Estados
military
Unidos
bases that
tiene
the U.S.
en
has
total,
in total,
eh, cuatro quintas partes
four
están en
fifths of
Estados
them
Unidos
are
y
in the
solo
U.S.,
una
and
quinta
only one
parte está
fifth
en el
is in
resto
the
del
rest
mundo.
of the
De
world.
por sí son muchas
And
bases
there's a
militares
lot of military
repartidas en
bases
todo el
out
territorio
spread
mundial.
across the
Tenemos
world
aproximadamente, porque
territory,
cada año varía, se
but
hacen ajustes,
approximately,
pero
because they change every
aproximadamente
year,
entre
there's
800 y 1000
between
bases
800 and
militares
1,000 military
estadounidenses
bases
en
in
nuestros
the
países, de las que son
in our countries.
reconocidas
These are bases that have
institucionalmente.
been
Hay
recognized
también
institutionally,
otras
but there are
bases
other
militares que
military
son a
bases that are
veces
sometimes
itinerantes, a veces
itinerant,
más efímeras,
sometimes they're
porque se colocan
ephemeral
según las
because they are
circunstancias y luego se
created
pueden
as the
retirar o
circumstances
mover de lugar, ¿no?
requires, or they're
Entonces, de las
moved to a new
reconocidas, de
location.
las
So,
institucionales,
of the
tenemos entre
institutionalized,
800 y 1000 bases
recognized bases,
en
there's
todo el planeta.
800 to
Pero
1,000 of
dentro
the
del
whole
territorio
planet.
del propio
But
Estados
within
Unidos
the
hay
U.S.
alrededor de
territory,
4000.
there's
De
over
manera que
4,000.
creo que el
So
trabajo que
I think that the
hace
work that
SOA
you
Watch
do, the work that
es también muy
SOAW does, is
importante
also
para que
very
la
important so
propia
that
sociedad
society itself,
norteamericana,
North
se
American
dé cuenta el
society,
grado de
becomes aware of
militarización,
the amount of
de vigilancia,
militarization,
de control
of
al que está sometido por su
observations, of
propio
control
gobierno, por las
that they are
propias fuerzas
being
dominantes de su país.
subjected to by
Y eso
their
me
own
parece
military
que
forces.
para el
And
mundo
I
es
think
muy
that it's
valioso
something that's very
porque
valuable for the world
no
because
podemos
we
pelear
can't
contra
fight
este
against this
militarismo si no
militarization if we don't
atendemos el
pay attention to the
problema
problem,
dentro de
which is
Estados Unidos
inside the
y
United
si
States.
no
And if we
atendemos
don't
también
look
el
also at the
impacto
impact, the
cultural que
cultural
tiene esta
impact that this
militarización y
militarization is
cómo cada vez
causing,
más
and
dentro de
how
la
every time
sociedad
more and
norteamericana
more within
hay
the American
una
society, there
adecuación a
is
ese
a joining,
militarismo
an
que
equating
muy claramente hoy se
militarization,
ve con
which is
estas
very
últimas
easy
elecciones
to see here
en
with
el
these
hecho
last
de que
elections,
tenemos
because
milicias
now you
armadas
see
por
that there
todos
are
lados,
armed
civiles
militias
armados por
everywhere,
todos lados,
civilians that are armed
queriendo hacer
everywhere,
justicia por su
trying to
propia mano.
make
justice at their own hand, by their own hands. And this creates a very dangerous situation because it's important to consider that the actions of the armed forces must be stopped because maybe they're too aggressive or it's negative. But at least when you're talking about armed forces, there is an outside possibility that there may be brought to justice. But with the case of the militias, they're so spread out, they're so spontaneous sometimes, it's very difficult to be specific, to be found at some point, at some place. And so it's very difficult to fight them. Anybody can have a weapon in their home, and anybody can become as part of a militia at any time. What is their purpose? Well, there's various purposes, and that is a very serious problem. And another very serious problem that I see now, and it's very connected with the work that SOA Watch does, is that by way that there have been advances, civil society to take to justice some people. There's also been this phenomenon that is about the privatization of the armed forces. Every time, more and more, where our joint exercises between um, institutional armies and these private armies. You can see this cases in any of the wars around the world. In Afghanistan, there are more mercenaries or private soldiers than there are institutional army people, for example. And with these private armies that are under contract, they have even been used to train regular forces of the actual U.S. armed forces. For example, Blackwater, it's very revealing because they would train special commands for the Army of the U.S., and they would work later in the same region with the special commands of private armies. This is something that's happening throughout the world, and it's very dangerous because there also, with these internal militias, also with these private armies, it's very difficult to put them, place them, and to pinpoint and bring them to justice. They're mercenaries, and mercenaries, by definition, are very evasive, and we're not able to just suddenly find out where we can, I don't know, bring them to justice. So they might get their day in court to be sanctioned for the things that they do. This is something that's very difficult, and every time the actions of the U.S. forces, including of the NATO, they are using this type of private armies. And so this is an element that we need to look at, to pay attention to think about what's happening in the region. As I was saying, in our region, there are, at this time, a certain amount of tension with the different intervention policies that have been happening, particularly that have been harassing Venezuela, oppressing them, and there has opted to have some interventions, either through internal forces or external forces. We have seen that mercenaries have been arriving at the coast of Venezuela in order to invade the country, but they have this idea of a full spectrum intervention to make some elements that are invisible, like uh, military intervention, but these are interventions that provide fragility to the Venezuelan society and to the whole country as well. And this is asphyxiating their economy. It's something that's been going on for many years, but now, on one side, they are almost being choked, but also, on the other hand, they have become ready to standing up to the struggle. And the Venezuelan people have been dealing with the blockade, with the wearing down and the degrading the social conditions that this blockade has imposed on them. But even though all of these things are happening, they're still willing to fight. With the change of the government in the United States, what you could expect is that there be a change from these crazy policies as far as interventions in the governments of the continent, but to have a more orderly policies that the U.S. has had in their history, and to be able to have um, different diplomacy that might be interventionist, but these are things that we have known about, that we SOA Watch has been studying over all of these years, and these are the policies that um, have an interventionist act, but they're more traditional, they're less crazy, less capricious, and much more systematic about what is happening in our continent. We have to we have to be very careful in the way that the United States has been able to involve other countries from the continent in these politics, these policies, the way this strangling of the Venezuela. There have been some countries, like, say, Brazil. Brazil is a perfect accomplice to the United States, and another great accomplice, which is incorporated with the same political logic in general terms as Colombia. And so they have forces that are moving from other territories, from internal territories in Latin America, but they are responding to U.S. policy. We have, of course, the case of Cuba and Venezuela that are subject to blockades. I would say Venezuela has been much more harmed, harassed by this blockade. Both are, of course, very difficult, but we also have this democratic process, which has been called progressive. Also in Bolivia, which recuperated its government. They were able to recuperate their society, which is throwing out or had thrown out this whole number of people that lend themselves to have a very perverse coup, very perverse for the people of Bolivia. This is something that's they're removing these people. Now the government is very serious. They have many ways of consolidation. So we're going to be able to see more interventionist policies of the United States. And that also there is a start of the electoral campaign, which is going to be ending at the beginning of next year, but also has a lot of possibilities that the strength of the previous government, which was very progressiveness policies, of self-determination of those countries that I have seen, that we have seen during the government of President Rafael Correa. And I would say in the times that the U.S. election is going on and the taking of the possession of the next president, perhaps the most threatened of these countries would be probably Ecuador, because Ecuador is going to be, at the time of the U.S. election, the new president will take power. So simply right there, there should be some red warning lights. We have to be very attentive to what is going to happen here. And I think that SOA Watch's work is very important here. Why? Not just because these interventions take on the form of, say, Marines going into Panama, like happened once before, but a very more a subtle form with all of these special forces, these special command forces that come in to destabilize, to corrupt, and also to give coups d'etats. So there you see that the work that the School of the Americas, or WINSEC, whatever you want to call it these days, but it's very vital to be warning the Latin American countries of how these forces are moving, how the United States is, what can be expected, and what kind of threats we need to be very careful about. In the maps that I am showing you, these are all of the military bases which are in the area. Also, a few things that I was saying come and go. There's these special operations centers, which are centers for training, but they're very specific. Some of the cases, they are training against urban riots, and this is something that we see a lot of in Chile, or they are training certain kinds of urban revolts or enemies, as they try to call them, which have specific characteristics. So it's more oriented towards the particularities of a situation, of where they are. And so, but the military bases opposed to this idea are the ones that are supporting actions that are a lot wider. These are places that support, these are jumping off points. This perhaps is like a base for intelligence gathering. There are some bases that have communication systems that are very impressive, and from there they monitor and they observe the region. And of course, from any of these, they can launch drones wherever they want. And from these bases, they have a lot wider operations, not so specific, but they deal with the whole region and other areas. So, of course, this is has something that is what this share is personnel that have been trained at the School of the Americas, as much of the national Latin Americans who collaborate with these special centers for training, but also North Americans who are also trained, educated by the School of the Americas, and which at the same time are trainers for the schools of the Americas, for example. So I would say that yes, we have to be very conscious of this. We have to be very active, as we always, SOAW Watch has always been over their 30 years. But also, we should not lose sight that below all of these military bases and aggressiveness, there are people in construction, people who are constructing something, and there's hopefully gives you hope for the possibility of removing the systems of death, like the capitalist system is one of these systems. It's a system that is in a crisis. It's just very deep. It's just something that is trying to survive, but it is also taking down the life of the planet. It's taking with it the environment, taking down the people, but it cannot maintain itself, sustain itself for too long. And they don't have the conditions for sustainability. The people know this. The people are creating their own alternatives, sustainable alternatives. They're different, not capitalistic, and sometimes a little capitalistic. Who knows? There's a lot of varieties there of projects, of purposes, and of construction. But that is what will allow us to take down this huge network, this huge web of military bases that's upon us, and this whole militaristic culture that is condemning us to death, not just in Latin America and the rest of the world, but also inside the United States. We have to stop these policies, these racist policies. We have to stop these militaristic policies and rethink in life, about life. And of course, that's what SOAW has always done, and that is what has caused us to walk hand in hand with them and to feel that they are walking with us during all of these years. So congratulations on this 30-year anniversary, and thank you very much for being with us up to now.